In the studio with us, talkTV's political correspondent Alicia Fitzgerald, and also we're joined by the former Labour advisor Mike Buckley on the programme as well. Alicia, can you just give us sort of the bare bones of this report? It's pretty scathing to say there are no compelling examples of delivery when it comes to levelling up. None at all.
Yes, I know, really a scathing report from the Public Accounts Committee, who've actually issued a series of scathing reports in the past few weeks. We've seen them be really, really critical of lots of areas of government spending. Yeah, exactly, pretty much everything. They've been pretty damning towards. And this is interesting because it's one of the few things where they're saying it's not a case of overspending, it's not a case of necessarily misspending, it's more that they're not spending the money at all. So they have this big allocation of cash that they have to spend in an allotted time frame. And the way that they work it out is they kind of give a few towns, a few areas across the UK every year, they get potentially an allocation of this money. And they're just basically saying that not enough is really being used of this cash. They've got £10.47 billion to spend between now and 2056, which obviously, yes, that is a while away, but that is a lot of money as well. And they're saying that only 1.24 billion of it has been spent so far. So they're just wondering what is actually happening with all of these funds.
When you say they're not spending it, have the local towns got the cash?
So potentially, yes, but they're saying the report claims that only 3.7 billion has been given to local authorities out of the total.
So central government have held on to the money?
They've held on to it. And then we've kind of got two separate issues. We've got the issue that not all of the money has gone to the local authorities, and then we have the issue that the local authorities aren't spending the money that they've been given. So that it's sometimes a case of the fact they don't know where to spend it, they don't know what maybe they should be prioritising, and they're not necessarily given the best advice about what to do to actually level up an area.
Mike's listening to this. Former Labour advisor Mike Buckley. Mike, do you think the principle of levelling up was brilliant, but actually in practice it's proved very difficult to actually work out what projects to spend on and actually finding the cash to do it properly?
I find this staggering, really, because as we all remember in 2019, this was a flagship offer, from the Conservative Party, and there was polling afterwards showing it was a significant vote winner for them. People recognised that levelling up was necessary, partly because of the previous decades of underinvestment, but particularly the prior 10 years since the Conservatives came in 2010. They cut a lot of regional development funding, which then meant it was very much needed in 2019. They've had 5 years to put this through, and they've signally failed to do so. It's not only that they haven't spent the money, they've also wasted money. There have been a lot of councils spending millions of pounds, sometimes up to £30 million, to put in a bid to government. But that money's often just gone nowhere because the government's ignored the bid or turned it down. So local councils could have invested that money locally, but they tried to get levelling up funds and haven't done so. So it seems like it's a very, very badly designed system.
Well, Mike, you're absolutely right. This was big news for Boris when he announced it. Let's take a look at Boris Johnson singing the praises of his levelling up plan.
Today, I'm fulfilling my promise to give 8 city regions, like the West Midlands, the funding to start making their bus and train networks as good as London by launching our City Region Sustainable Transport Fund, £4.2 billion that local leadership can spend on projects like contactless ticketing, new tram lines, bike lanes, and I speak as somebody who's put in more bike lanes probably than anybody else in this country.
Alicia, maybe this isn't possible, but I'm from near Birmingham. I think we would rather see this levelling up money spent on reducing our council tax and maybe solving our bankruptcy problem with our council rather than more bike lanes that none of us are asking for. This
is it, and it's maybe a good time to sum up what actually levelling up means. It's a great kind of political jargon term, isn't it? But what actually is levelling up? And these are all these things that just make an area better to live in. So it's things like Nick was saying, street lights. It's things like having shops not boarded up and having businesses there. It's all of these things that just make life seem a bit more normal and functioning in your area. But this is the thing, Boris Johnson talking about bike lanes and things. As you say, JJ, I think lots of people will just say that is not the priority here. Potholes and things like that are things that really do annoy people and things that really people want sorted out.
Also, so bike transport infrastructure. I mean, look at what happened with HS2. That was supposed to be the biggest pledge when it came to levelling up and how that's all fallen apart. Shall we talk about what we learned yesterday? So much speculation about when this general election is going to be. The Prime Minister, asked by ITV News, says it's not going to be in May. Mike, what do you think? Because potentially this is longer for you to wait to be able to have your say to try and vote out the Conservatives.
It is, and I think the public are quite ready for the next general election, to be honest. I mean, the polls haven't moved since Liz Truss was Prime Minister, which is getting on for 2 years ago now. Most people decided then that they want to change the government, and Labour have been about 20 points ahead in the polls since then. So the result seems inevitable, which I think is why Rishi Sunak has made the decision that he's made. I mean, it was public knowledge that the Conservatives wanted an election in May. I think what they wanted was to get a bounce from cutting national insurance in the autumn and then doing so again a couple of weeks ago. But the polls just haven't moved and Labour is consistently ahead. But we know it for a few months ago, the government was cancelling lots of meetings in May and obviously preparing the ground through running an election campaign. And they've obviously just decided, you know what, this is not the time. And they've essentially run away scared.
Well, Labour have responded rather cheekily to Sunak's announcement. Have a look at this.
Sounds right. I mean, it's not a sophisticated political comeback.
I mean, do we ever see sophisticated political comeback? I mean, this has become a norm. I mean, especially on Twitter, we see every time either the Conservative Party or the Labour Party do anything that can possibly be jumped upon, we see some kind of jokey, spoofy video or edited picture of it online. It seems to be a bit of a norm now. But just going back to actually the actual election date, this has been speculation for a long time, JJ. I know what team you're on about this. We've spoken about this so many times. But this has just been one of those rumours that has got bigger and bigger and bigger about when a general election will be called. I think initially everyone all thought it was going to be the second half of the year. I still do think that.
And the Prime Minister said, they said working assumption would be the second part of the year.
He did, but we do also know that they do like to play some tricks on us sometimes. They like to, as Lee Anderson said the other day, throw us off the scent and try and kind of say that something will be one time when actually it may not. So it's not to say that it definitely won't be in May, but I do think we can probably take his word for it that we can rule this one out.
And if they do, when they do the general election, are the Tories going to have enough money to even fight this election? Because it turns out Frank Hester, the donor who has been called a racist, has apparently donated another £5 million on top of the 10 million he'd initially donated, and the Tories are being told, give that money back?
Well, the answer to your first question of whether they will have the money is yes, because they're not going to give it back. They are absolutely not going to give it back. I mean, £15 million in an election year is a hell of a lot of money. And there is, the likelihood of them turning around and saying, we're going to give this money back is so slim. I've even heard lots of Conservative MPs argue that it would be wrong to give it back morally because you're almost rewarding him back with this big sum of cash for making these comments. So I think it's unlikely.
Mike, what do you think is going to happen to this money? I think one of the biggest problems with the Conservatives is they haven't been clear and concise and direct, straight up about what they're going to do with it, which makes us suggest, that all intents and purposes, they're going to keep it. Oh, Mike, can you?
They will keep it. They will spend it on election campaign ads on Facebook and on billboards. I would be staggered if they did anything other than that. What they should do is give it to an anti-racism charity, which would prove that they actually cared about the issue, which would be a nice thing to see. And indeed, it would stop it going back to Frank Hester, who probably doesn't deserve to have the money either.
Mike, but Frank Hester has also received, or his businesses have received over £400 million in government contracts. Do you think going forward, the Tories are going to stop him getting more contracts, or will it be business as normal?
I think he certainly should stop getting those contracts. I mean, there may be some time lag. I would imagine that would have been deals signed that will have, committed the NHS to giving him this work for years to come. But I think if a way can be found to prevent that going forward, then that would be a good thing. But certainly they shouldn't be renewed. I mean, he clearly is not inappropriate to be receiving government cash in any sense, but particularly for the NHS, which, as we know, I think it's the most diverse employer in the world, or certainly one of the most diverse employers in the world. And the comments that have been attributed to him have just been absolutely horrific, as we all know.
The Conservatives' handling of this has raised some significant questions from within the Conservatives itself, Alicia, about Rishi Sunak's sort of steering of the party. We know quite a lot of his own MPs are pretty unhappy. How much discontent is there within his own ranks?
I mean, a lot, and this discontent has definitely been growing. It's not been something that's really sudden. I mean, we've seen this build up pretty much since he entered office, if you want to take it that far. But definitely we've seen this added tension and this added kind of feeling of frustration within the party. Definitely, probably from just before Christmas, I think. It was when this Rwanda bill was going through the House of Commons. I'm sorry to bring it back to the Rwanda bill, but that really did seem to cause a lot of division. And that's when we had these factions within the party really coming forward and being very vocal in their opposition to Rishi Sunak. And that seems to have only grown. And issues like this, the Frank Hester thing, seems to have very much only mounted growing discontent with Rishi Sunak. But the issue is do we replace him before a general election and potentially have more upheaval?
Oh my gosh, a leadership contest before, yeah, can you imagine?
I mean, yeah, it would be a lot.
Nurses want a pay rise, they're told no. Doctors want a pay rise, they're told no. But it's OK, the MPs are going to get a pay rise. Good for them.
MPs getting a 5.5% pay rise, taking their salary to just over £91,000 a year. I mean, lots of people will argue that they're actually not paid enough. We have to remember that as well.
Many people will argue that.
Look, just to be clear, MPs don't determine their own salary either, do they? We should make that clear.
Yeah, that's really important. But also, lots of people will say, you know, it's a 7-day-a-week job. It's really difficult. It's challenging. They should be paid more. But I think given the backdrop at the moment, the economic backdrop, lots of people really struggling to make ends meet. Lots of people having not had a pay rise in so long. And as you mentioned, nurses, doctors, all of these people still on strike. I think lots of people will look to the government and say this is not the time. But it's not up to them, so...
Well, £91,000 it would take their salary to. I think that's enough. I think that's just enough. Plus expenses. Anyway, thank you, Alicia, and thank you, former Labour advisor Mike Buckley.